life with the Catholic Church is the best game ever. I mean, you are constantly on this quest to improve your holiness, and just think about the win condition, heaven. I mean, right? It's like, just think about the catechism of the Catholic Church. It's like, that's how you score victory points. It's like, I gotta do this, don't do that. And it just it turns your life into this glorious quest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of our conversation on video games and evangelization. I'm Bobby Angel, a fellow at the Word on Fire Institute, and with me is Father Blake Britton, a friend, a priest of the Diocese of Orlando, a Word on Fire contributor, and a video game player. Father Blake, how you doing?
Doing very well, thank you, and just as always, happy to be here and looking forward to our guest today.
Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Edward Castronova. Dr. Castronova is a professor of media at Indiana University, specializing in games, technology, and society. He's given a presentation on TEDx. He's the author of many books, including Life is a Game, What Game Design Says About the Human Condition. He's also a passionate Catholic, and we are honored to have him here in our conversation. Dr. Castronova, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Doctor, what's the first video game you ever played?
That would be Pong. So,
wow.
Yeah. I remember my mom worked in a bar, and I remember being in the bar, and she was like, go do something. And they brought in this mahogany table, and it had a TV in it, and you look down on it, it had a little dial, and it made that beep, beep noise. Younger people, just to torture yourself a little bit, imagine playing that as your main entertainment for hours a day. Beep, beep, beep. So that's where I got my start. Yeah.
But even there's something about that. Like, this is something new. This is something.
It was cool.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So you're one of the original gamers, I fancy myself a gamer. Of course, a lot of Gen Z will fancy themselves gamers, but I mean, we're not one of the originals, You come from that original
part of board games before. I mean, I was first a big board gamer, then became a video game player later.
Yeah, I mean, how was it? Yeah, that's always something, as millennial Gen Z, we always like asking, for example, our grandparents, I'll ask them, what was it like, on D-Day? What was it like when this major event happened in history? Well, video games was a major event. It's now shaped so much of culture. So for you, what was it like playing really one of the first major video games? I mean, this new form of entertainment, you were part of the first generation to really experience it. What was the feeling? What was the emotion? Sort of describe the experience a little bit to us.
Well, I'd like to share this with, every young person watching. The way these things happen is you don't even notice. Like, the technology creeps in and you find yourself using it just out of a feeling of convenience or entertainment. And then at some later point, you look back and you go, wow, we have changed everything. I mean, just think about smartphones, right? It was only a decade ago, and it was just, okay, this is a convenient thing. Now you can't live without it. And I think the same thing happened with video games. It started out, it was a neat form of pinball, was the very first. And it just gradually grew. And, there was that moment, the first time, you were with some people, and you're like, boy, I'd really rather be playing Civilization right now. I'm more antsy to go do that. And the first time you could play it on a handheld device, I was like, oh, cool. I can now pass the time at the bus stop. And it just gradually has grown and grown and grown until, we're playing these things all the time. So, and another thing is that it used to be just a thing for kids. Gradually, those kids got older and they kept playing. So now it's almost universal.
Yeah, I mean, and that's us. That's we who have grown up gaming, and now we are the adults, God help us, who again are now fathers, biologically and spiritually. And so it's navigating the world of video games for ourselves as well as the next generation.
Mm-hmm. That's now an important part of parenting. Every parent I talk to has the conflict, right, between video game play and regular life, and it's like this dirty little secret that the parents are playing too. So, it sort of undercuts your argument about, why are you wasting your time in video games, and then you're sitting there playing Bejeweled.
Right.
Right. And the beautiful thing too is you've been able to weave in a love of games, and games in the broad sense of, again, a baseball game to chess to video games into your career. Can you tell us a little bit about your career?
Well, my career, it was as surprising to me as I think it was to anyone. I started out as an economist, and I'm not a very good one. And I was studying poverty and kind of living it too, because I wasn't, but that's another story. And I got depressed. And so I said, to heck with it. I'm going to just sit in my apartment in the, emptiness of Los Angeles and play video games. And I started playing this game called EverQuest. And I noticed that there were markets in it. People were buying and selling things for gold pieces or platinum pieces, whatever they called it. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny? I have all this economics training. I'm going to take this seriously and write like a serious paper about this stupid video game economy. And the more I worked on that paper, the more I was like, this is a lot of money. People are putting incredible amounts of hours into this, and they're using their own money to buy things, and it came out to like hundreds of millions of dollars happening inside this video game. So I wrote the paper, and it just took off on the internet. And pretty soon, Indiana University called me up and said, "We know you're an economist. How would you like to just work on video games? You can work on the economics of video games, or you could just work on video games." And I said, "Sign me up." So it's really, I just sort of, there's a rocket called video games, and I hooked into it at an early point, and I'm just going to keep holding on until they claw me away.
That's awesome. And you're also a man of faith. Can you tell us a bit about your journey there to Catholicism?
Well, it's a sober story. I started out, I was an atheist, and I don't mind sharing this. My girlfriend in college and I, we got pregnant. And being atheists, we didn't even think twice about it. We just went down to the local abortion clinic there in Washington and had an abortion. I remember, sitting in the waiting room, flipping through magazines like you're going to the dentist. But something hit me that night, because I realized there's some possibility, there's some probability that was a human life. And as a reasonable atheist, I just started thinking, so under what circumstances would it be okay to have a 1% probability that you committed murder? And I started thinking about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it. I spent a decade looking for that argument, to settle myself, like, why is it okay? And I never found it, and I still haven't found it. As it slowly seeped in, this realization that I had, at least there's a positive probability that I committed a murder, of a completely innocent being. Catholicism became more and more attractive to me because of its teaching about redemption of sin, and so I was attracted to the church. I started church shopping, but I chose Catholicism, and you can imagine what my first confession was like. It was a big relief, and it's really interesting that my life took an inflection point at that moment. 1995. And now, after having a very sad and troubled early life, I feel like I'm in a state of bliss. I mean, I'm married, I got a dog, I got kids, I have this wonderful career in this safe, wonderful place where I live. I get to talk to wonderful people like you. So, if I was giving stars for different things, I would give the Catholic Church 5 stars based on my experience.
Thank you. We're happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Was it?
I do want to talk to God's customer service representatives at some point, but I do have a few things.
And then now having a career on video games, how has your faith intersected there? How have you seen the crossover again of elements of the faith in video games?
Yeah, what's happened to me is it's this oddity I keep encountering, right? So I have a private life, very faith-filled, and then I feel like there's increasingly this conflict between the way the church views reality, which I think is truth, and the way that the world is, and I'm like, man, these things don't add up. And then I go into video games and I'm like, video game developers are looking at the world a lot closer to the way the Catholic Church is. I'll just give you a few examples. Almost every video game has some kind of notion of God in it. They're always gods, they're spirits, they're ghosts, right? There's a genuine supernatural dimension in almost every video game of any substance. Okay, not, Tetris, but, the narrative ones especially. And people are really comfortable with that. They love being in that environment. And then I look out here, and every institution is just trying to wipe God out of it. The YMCA, Young Men's Christians Association, oh, no, now it's just the Y.
Right.
And so it's weird to me. It's like as they're working so hard to disenchant the real world, you go into video games, and they're not kidding around, right? They're trying to make money. They're giving people what they want. And so it's just like what St. Augustine said, right? The restless heart is going to keep looking. So think about it. People looking for God, they go to video games. That's where gods are. And so that, as in my career as a scholar of video games and then as a religious person, I'm just looking at that contrast and thinking pretty hard about why that would be. And that's sort of the body of a lot of my research right now.
It's so fascinating that you bring up that topic, because we've literally had this conversation several times of the fact that the video game industry does not pull any punches when it comes to recognizing the aches of the human heart. And there's now a small section of video game designers, sort of, a less than 1% section, who's trying to maybe peddle specific agendas, secular world agendas, into the video game industry itself. But gamers as a whole want nothing to do with it. I mean, gamers as a whole, they are very much attracted to, drawn to the deeper aspects of reality, to the spiritual components, to the familial components, to the psychological and to the anthropological components, of course, the philosophy and the theology. And you're absolutely right. These are trends that I've noticed in my own study of video game culture and interacting with multiple gamers, that they love this kind of stuff, and the industry knows it. And they're able to recognize these deeper longings of the human heart, and they capitalize on it wonderfully. Yeah.
So in pursuit of this question, trying to understand it, I looked at the various scholars who've written about games and fantasy literature and so on. And, people probably know the name J.R.R. Tolkien, right, who wrote The Lord of the Rings. He has a fascinating essay, and I recommend it to anyone. It's called On Fairy Stories. And he very rarely talked about why he was doing what he was doing. But in that essay, he explained it. And the killer quote for me from that essay is, "Why should a man be scorned if, finding himself in prison, he tries to get out and go home?" Right? And what he's addressing there is this view that, like, fantasy literature and video games all bad for us. It's just escapism. And I would say, no, it's a refuge. And Tolkien's point is, we go into those places because they are actually closer to the Godhead than, driving down the street in Newark, New Jersey. Right? It's the things that we see in fantasy games are not so much imagination, but more like memory.
Right.
They're a reminder to us of, for example, you think about elves. In most of these lore areas, an elf is in many ways kind of a perfect person. Well, doesn't the church teach that this place where we are is a not perfect place, but there is a perfect place, and in that perfect place, we're going to be perfect, our perfect selves, the very best version of ourselves, as Matthew Kelly says. So and then that makes it seem entirely natural to think about the supernatural, the metaphysical dimensions, and to see them in fantasy books and literature, fairy tales, and then various myths and video games as well.
That's
so
the
the old thinkers are all over this, is kind of what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the point I always try to make with parents who come to me and sort of concerned, like why is my son playing video games for hours or my daughter's playing video games for hours? And the point I mentioned to them is that they're not doing this just for sheer entertainment. They're not doing this just because they hate the world and what have you. They're doing this because they're trying to find the world. And
Yeah.
in the end, they're spending time in these places because when they play these video games where they have these large landscapes and these open worlds or these beautiful soundtracks or deep story plots, there's something in their humanity that says, yes, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And I'm not finding that in the
Yeah.
world around me, in the technological, atheistic, secularized society. But I am able to find that in this virtual world. And so I'm happier here because it actually reflects reality better than what's immediately around me in the secular atheistic society that's been created around me. I mean, would you
Just
agree?
think about the contrast between high school and a video game. The video game has God in it. The high school does not. And if you're in an environment that doesn't have God in it, it's got to just feel weird and empty. And well, I know this as an atheist. It's kind of like you're just in a box with nothing on the walls, and it just something fundamental is missing. Whereas when you're playing a video game, well, there's good and evil, right? There's a creator. There are powerful beings. I mean, it's all. It's another thing Tolkien said is that a crazy giant in a Gaelic fairy tale is more real than some factory that somebody came up with.
Yeah.
And so, boy, I talked to some pretty serious audiences, business people and people who work in the Defense Department, and they're all like, oh, this is all fantasy. And I trying to get them to understand that there's more reality in a video game in many ways than there is in the real world. And it's a leap for them to get there. But, I'll just give you one example. I'm sorry I'm going on, but
Please.
Let me give you one example. People are blown away by the fact that gold pieces in video games have real economic value. There's no question that they do. But it's like, well, why do you think the dollar has economic value, right? It's because people want it. That's the only reason, right? You kind of realize that the things we value in the real world are kind of not so real, and then the things we value in video games, they're kind of more real than we realize, and then suddenly it all starts to blend together. So, we're learning a lot about this technology and how it interfaces with the brain.
You've remarked as well at how video game developers understand the ache of the human heart better than the church does at times in calling out men and women to mission, to purpose, to quest.
Yes.
And you quote Alistair McIntyre, the philosopher, in your book, talking about like modern man has lost his quest, has lost his meaning, has lost his purpose. It's very clear cut in a game what the purpose is, whether that's working as a team or whether that's a solo adventurer. Why is quest so important?
Well, the philosophers and sociologists have been talking about the way modern humans are lost for more than 150 years, right? And they just sort of, well, it's the modern condition, et cetera, et cetera. But the miraculous thing that's happened is technology now allows us to give people an environment that feels pretty real, but doesn't have that problem, right? That you go into the video game and there's always a mentor who's there saying, you're needed. You're important here. You're special. We need you to do something. You're the only one who can do it, in fact. And we can sit back and say, oh, isn't that terrible? It's terrible that people are getting mentoring from a character in a video game. And that is kind of terrible in one sense. But is it the video game's fault or is it our world? Right? Sometimes we can say, it's terrible that someone's getting a mentor in a video game, but we can say that that's a mirror about our society. That people aren't getting the ethical, moral, and quest-oriented mentoring that they need from the real world. And it's a problem, perhaps. But maybe what we should do about it is look at our world.
Yeah.
And not try to ban the video game.
We're just sitting here like emphatically nodding with you, agreeing 1,000%. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's a lacuna, there's a hole in society right now that needs to be filled, and it's not being filled. And so video games have stepped in order to provide that filling, especially when it comes to mentorship. What we've mentioned regularly is fatherhood in particular. You know, we have a society that's lacking fathers, and so you see this sort of patristic, paternal notion in video games now with some of these mentors where they're a father to you. You know, they mentor you through life. There are even video games where you grow up and you become older throughout the game. And it's amazing to see. And you're right, I think it's shame on us. You know, shame on us as the world, but also shame on the church in some regards, that we've allowed this hole to develop and we have not really recognized the need to fill it. So video games are highlighting that hole for us, and I think are administrating to it better than we are in many circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, before we yell at some young person, say, you have to be in reality, I'm going to say, well, you've got to put God back into reality before you can recommend it.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
Yeah.
And again, the quest on the personal level for the modern man and woman that's aching for meaning and purpose, we would say in the Christian sense, that's vocation. That's call.
Yes.
That's the beckoning forward of, come forward to this great adventure that God has for you in the real world.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, I lately I've been getting really into Benedictine spirituality, and so Saint Benedict is this awesome dude who in the 500s, when the whole world was falling apart, he said, let's get a bunch of people together and make a monastery. And those monasteries changed the world. And one of the things about them is, you know, you should see God in what you do every day. But now we think of it as, you know, God is calling all of us to do something, and even the simplest work can be dedicated to God. And again, here's the video game connection. When you're a little new character in a video game, the first task isn't to go defeat the demon Asmongold or whatever. It's, can you take this bottle to the next village
Right,
and kill the rats that are attacking you and deliver it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's enough, you know, you feel like you're doing something. So
that's true. And then you'll level up from this task of bringing the barrel down the river.
Yeah, exactly.
You build to saving the world.
Yeah, and eventually you do get to save the world.
Right.
And that it correlates to human life so wonderfully that way. And the other thing that I've noticed too, and we're actually going to bring this up with another interviewee as well, we've sort of lost this notion of rite of passage in civilization, in femininity and masculinity. And that's something else that the video game industry provides. You know, there's always rites of passage, I've noticed, even in something like Zelda Ocarina of Time, which is a mutual game that we both thoroughly enjoy. When Link grows into a man, you know, he completes a series of quests he's trying to save, and then of course because of time, there's a time loop sort of situation that goes on there. But there's a rite of passage that takes place within many of these video games, and those rites of passages have been obliterated by an artificial sense of tolerance in the modern world. And we need to regain also that sense of rite of passage. You know, this I earn things in life, and as human persons made in God's likeness and image, we like to earn things. We like to accomplish holiness. We want to make this world a better place because we lived in it.
Yeah.
And we've negated that in so many ways, and we've deprived many of our young people from that shared experience, I feel.
Well, you know, it's interesting. This is kind of another theme I have. Being trained as an economist, economics looks at the world, and most social science, as, well, people have problems, and what we need to do is help them with their problems. So in an economic problem, if you give someone more money, they can get more of the stuff they want, and we say, well, they're better off, right? That's what we say in econ. But in game design, you say the opposite. You should never just give people things. That's no fun. There's no sense of achievement in it. But you also don't want to prevent them from ever getting anything. The trick is to design problems for them that they can solve, and when they've solved them, they feel like they've achieved something. Think what would happen to all of our economic and social policy if we stopped saying, you've got a problem, we're going to fix it, or you've got a problem, we're not going to fix that, figure it out yourself. What if we started to think about public policy as we're trying to create quest environments so that everybody can kind of achieve things and feel good about having accomplishments? I think there would just be a revectoring of how we think about it, but that's what game developers do, and they are policymakers.
if you want our generation to get involved in civic life, I think you need to frame it in terms of a quest.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Senator task accomplished.
Yeah, exactly.
But really, I agree with you 100%. I mean, we've taken away this larger notion of quest. First of all, in the socio-political aspect, most certainly, in the educational aspect, but even in the religious aspect. This is one of the biggest criticisms that we receive as a church, actually, from a lot of young people who even tend towards the more traditionalist paths of Catholicism, is they say, you know what? Our local parish does not challenge us to holiness. Our local priest in his homilies, our local priest in the confessional, our local priest in the way that he preaches and teaches, he's not making me feel like I'm called to greatness. He's making me feel like I'm mediocre. He's speaking down to me, or he's dumbing down the faith. This is one of Bishop Barron's big sort of milieus. He's constantly saying, we got to stop dumbing things down. It's about raising the bar. As Catholics, we have the most outstanding tradition in history, and yet we've made our bars so low that we've sort of handicapped an entire generation of Catholics from acquiring great holiness and sanctity, and that's wrong. That's wrong. I agree with you that we need to rehab this sense of quest also within the church.
There's nothing that makes a situation less fun and more boring than to be told, you know what, there's cool stuff here, but you probably can't handle it. And you know what, you're great the way you are right now.
Right.
What people want to hear, and what puts people on a good path, is if someone with the fiery gaze of a Fulton Sheen looks at them and says, I expect more from you. And this is what video game mentors do. They say, get out there and kill those monsters.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
Dr. Castronova, this series has been what we wanted it to be, is affirmative, again, of video game culture, where there is community, truth, goodness, and beauty. But again, there's always kind of another side to the coin. And we've chatted previously about the dangers of only living virtually, of when, again, these game designers that know what they're doing are making them, very beautiful but very addictive if we don't have enough self-control. Can you talk a little bit about that danger of only questing online?
Right. Well, I mean, first thing off the bat, advice for parents, I would be more worried about the time shift aspect of this than the content. Right? If you wanted to protect your kid from content, do not let them go on YouTube. Right? That's where the bad content is. Video games don't have any content issues like that, but there is a problem of people, especially boys, adolescent boys, my own sons, just spending too much time on it. And we try to take that period as we're letting our kid learn how to control themselves and walk away, and it takes time. So, I'll just say that. But just in terms of like managing my own life and how much time I should spend in the virtual environment, it is something to pay attention to. And this is just the miraculous nature of Catholicism. If you go back to the very early days of the internet, the church was already releasing statements that emphasized this is a church of flesh and blood. There's no such thing as virtual communion. The Mass ideally happens in a community of people who are, a sizable group who are right with each other, breathing the same air, rubbing shoulders, and receiving the real presence in an actual physical entity, whether it be wine or bread. And as I started thinking about, virtuality and all this, I'm like, man, that is a harbor in this difficult ocean, right? Is that if we trust the church, then we know that no matter how virtual everything seems to be, and that doesn't just include video games, right? I mean, how much time do we spend looking at these things, whether it's a game or not? But when you're a Catholic, you always have to be brought out of that, and you go to be with other people in their flesh and blood, and meditate and worship with them communally in a space. That, I think, is an anchor. It's a ground. It's something that, if you think about this in the most extreme sense, could save humanity, because we will not be completely lost into all the entertaining things that will be made for us.
Yeah, that's where the convergence, in my opinion, between evangelization and video games take place. is being able to bridge that gap between the virtual world and the incarnate reality of Catholicism. And really only Catholicism offers that incarnate encounter. And so seeing how I'm attracted to video games for X, Y, and Z reasons, which in the end are good reasons. We are human persons who are attracted to the good, as St. Augustine will constantly remind us, and all the other theologians and writers of the church. So now what I need to discern is, how can I transfer that ache for the good, that ache for the true, that ache for the beautiful, into an incarnate, real experience? And maybe even use video games to supplement every once in a while to remind me of that ache, but not to try to satisfy it only in the virtual world. As you mentioned, this can only be really fulfilled through a real encounter with Jesus Christ and through a real encounter with the gospel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of video games when things are going well, it's more of a refuge. It's like things just are too stressful in the real world, and I want some kind of clear achievement. Go play the video game. But ultimately, right, the thing the video game is kind of satisfying you about is to be found in the worship of God and His Son Jesus Christ. Right? That's the true satisfaction. And to the extent that video games give people a hint of it, right? They're all to the good. But beyond that, it's like any technology, right? It's got to be, there's good and there's bad applications. And so I think in this particular case, we can really look to the Catholic Church's teachings and use that to sort of balance our lives. And, young people, especially young boys, have to learn how to do that. And so going to church is a wonderful antidote to, or a complement to a video game practice, video game use. And I'm pretty excited at seeing these things go together. I mean, lately I've been thinking of all of human history as an encounter between the church and technology. That's pretty much the story. Why are things the way they are? Well, because of the church and because of technology. So, and I think the dance between video games and Catholicism is going to go on for a good long time, and I see good things coming out of that.
And it's a process too of like, this new technology comes out, can we trust it? And we kind of like rub up against it for a little while. But then there's a deciding moment of like, well, it's here, we got to use it for good. Whether that's the printing press. Again, you mentioned Fulton Sheen and the power of media. We obviously know Bishop Barron embracing YouTube and the internet. And I think too, we're at a moment right now in the church where video games are here to stay. And we've got to open up that conversation. And again, we who grew up playing these games are now adults.
Right.
And so how do we merge the two? We don't, again, demonize it or just, don't let it touch our faith at all. It's like, how do we use this well?
Yeah, how Pope Francis says you have to smell like the sheep. Well, there's some sheep who are kind of sitting in their comfy chairs and they're lost. They're just sitting in a chair playing a video game, and they'll probably tell you that they're really happy, but there's it's got to eat away at you if this is your life, and we can help those people.
Yeah, and that's one of the main goals of this series and just Word on Fire's initiative that we're taking in regards to video games. Is you're absolutely correct. This is not going anywhere. This is the largest now entertainment industry in the world, and there are billions of people who participate in this industry. And moving forward, we have an obligation, I think, an evangelical and a missionary obligation to preach the gospel in this dynamic. And I'm just very excited about it. I think you're correct in saying that this can only go well if we take the initiative properly, and we're guided by the Holy Spirit. So it's men like you, women like you, who are in the trenches every single day, who are being faithful to your vocation to holiness, who are being faithful to your vocation to follow Jesus Christ amidst the world that give us hope. So just thank you so much for your amazing vocation as a husband, as a father, as a Catholic man, and as a professor. It really is splendid, Dr. Castronova.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say one thing. If you happen to be a video gamer, whether you're religious or not, you know how sometimes you can be nice to another person who's also in the game, or not very nice to them? Just reflect on this. Every time you're being nice, you're helping God, and you're taking another step closer to it. So you should feel good about that. And so maybe tonight when you go to play, just do something nice for somebody else. and reflect on it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Be nice to the other players.
Be nice
and
to the player.
any other NPCs.
Yeah, definitely be nice to the NPCs. You never know when they might go rogue.
They haven't done anything wrong.
We were joking earlier about a Zelda, again, one of our favorite games. The first time that I was traumatized for trying to kill the chicken.
Okay.
And the game punishes you. So if you try to, kill a chicken in the game, which I mean, okay, I'm a tween kid,
With a sword.
With a sword. And I see a chicken. What am I going to do? I'm going to try to hit this chicken,
Yeah.
So I hit the chicken, and then all of a sudden swarms of chickens come and start pecking me to death. And I'm like, man, okay, consequences, like there are real world consequences. So now every time I see a chicken, I sort of shudder. I'm like, I'm your friend, I'm your friend. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Be nice to everybody. Be nice to the chickens, be nice to the NPC. But there's a beauty that in this virtual world, you also have the capacity to live the gospel. I'm a gamer. I do online gaming. I have multiple interactions on a regular basis with people from around the world, and it really does touch them when they hear a Catholic priest is gaming with them. And it's interesting too, because the whole dynamic changes of the squad that you're in or the league that you're in as well. Like all of a sudden people stop cussing,
Right.
They're like, they stop saying the name of the Lord in vain. So like, oh, or they'll say something and, they'll be like, oh, sorry, Father. I didn't mean to do that. And so it's there. Like the religious sentiment is there. We are ens religiosum, we're religious beings. And all that they're waiting for, these gamers are just waiting for a voice, for a compass to guide them through this environment. I think that once the compass is provided, once it's given, that they'll flock to it. So so you're part of that,
The life with the Catholic Church is the best game ever. I mean, you are constantly on this quest to improve your holiness, and just think about the win condition, heaven. I mean, right? It's like, just think about the catechism of the Catholic Church. It's like, that's how you score victory points. It's like, I gotta do this, don't do that, and it turns your life into this glorious quest, and it teaches you, like, this is where success as a person comes from. It comes from family. It comes from being, following your vocation, whether it's priest, monk, married, and you're not working because you're trying to get more money for Exxon or something like that. You're doing it because you're called to use your skills and to earn money that you give to other people. It's so uplifting. It's a wonderful game. I mean, Catholicism makes the game of life just incredibly entertaining.
And the best thing about the game of Catholicism is there are no microtransactions.
Right. So there's lots of gear. Like, I got all these rosaries, and I got prayer cards, and I got all these things. It's Catholicism has the best gear, I think.
We have the coolest looking gear. As a priest, I get some awesome skins, awesome outfits. I get a cassock, vestments, collars. I agree 100%.
Dr. Castronova, we could go on and on, but you've done videos, you've written books, you've got lots of blogs out there. Is there a website people can go to learn more about your work?
Yeah, edwardcastronova.com. For better or for worse, it's there. I would be happy if people would read my latest book, The Life is a Game book. I wrote it for folks who are not religious, and it isn't a religious book. It's about how to make life less boring.
Yeah, and again, if you're into video games or baseball, other sports, or chess, it applies to the whole thing, the way you write it. So your book, Life is a Game, it's great.
Yeah, so I'd be happy if people would if all the things that I've done, that would be a good thing for people to look at.
Yeah, amen. Thank you again for your time, Doctor.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Well, thank you for watching this episode of Video Games and Evangelization. I'm Bobby Angel with the Word on Fire Institute.
And I'm Father Blake Britton, contributor to the Word on Fire Institute. God bless, and game on.